Okay, so we had such a dry winter. It only rained once in January, and after that, it rained no more than like a quarter inch, maybe 2 or 3 times since then. So we had been pretty dry out there, and I finally irrigated back about 4 weeks ago. And this is what you get when you irrigate. You get lots of new leaves. So the whole orchard flushed new leaves, some flowers, and now it's really time to get in and cut off all that new growth and get the branches sorted onto each wire. As you can see, if I don't know if you can see on this one, uh, on this wire right here, there's it's hanging way off of the wire, and this one had fruit on it, and so that's what will happen. So we'll be going through and winding them around each wire, its own wire. And then can take off the tassel, and we're good to go on this branch. And so as we go around, we'll be winding wires and pruning, winding around, and the wires end up taking on the weight of the fruit, right? So right now I'm harvesting white piri. It's already in August, so I'm harvesting white piri and keats. These are the keats, where had pretty good fruit set on the keats this year. Here's another one, easy. And the top portion of the tree hasn't even really flowered this year, so there'll be years where I expect it'll be it'll be even more heavier than this. And the keats being such a big mango, really ooh, this one goes way above the wire, so this whole thing needs to come down this year. Can't see into the sun, sorry, but lots of pruning. So as I'm pruning, which is always the number one question, and it was always my number one question when I started this high density orchards with the trellis and without the trellis, is how are you going to handle the pruning? How are you going to prune so that the tree can continually produce every year and you can maintain the size that you want it, which for this trellis is 8 feet height, and I'm pretty much going with this ultra high density orchard as well, with a 8 to 9 foot height is the desired height. So these trees are a little easier to see off. Well, they didn't flush as much. The keats didn't flush as much right now because they're holding so much fruit, but the white pears are almost done, and they almost all flush pretty heavy, as you can see on this guy. It's still got quite a bit of mango on them, but they're all ripening right now. So the way I approach pruning is basically the same way that you approach pruning on a regular mango tree, in that each wire is considered like a scaffold branch. And so, like, if you was pruning a regular tree, a regular rounded canopy tree, as opposed to the flat canopy trees that we're doing here, each wire holds its has its own space. So if a branch is growing up to the next wire above it, it gets pruned down. If it's growing downward facing to the wire below, then it gets pruned out, right? So, or any branches that are going inwards towards the center of the center leader, those are pruned out. And so you keep each branch that is on each wire in its own space. And that's how you approach the pruning, is that if it's going up into another wire's space, then it gets pruned out. And in the same idea with the regular canopied orchards, in that each scaffold branch has its own space. So any branches that are going inwards, or any branches that are going sidewards or crossing into the other scaffold branches space, those get pruned out, right? Because it just creates the density that restricts airflow and sunlight when you have branches going into other branches area, if that kind of makes sense. I'm still trying to figure out how to put it to words. So like we have the wires here, I consider half of the wire, half of the space between each wire to be that wire space, right? So any branches that are going into the other space gets pruned out. And the bottom wire, for me, the bottom wire is set at 24 inches. That's that's maybe a little too low for mangoes, because just the panicle alone, you know, here, this the part that's holding the mango is 12 to 18 inches. So even if you're tightly wired on the bottom wire, wound around the bottom wire, once it flowers, it'll still reach down to the ground, and then you have to go through and twist the fruits up off of the ground, which I've done, and it's not too much, but it is added work. If you only have a little bit of trellises to do, then you gladly do them. But if you have acres of trellises to do, you'll start to get bitter. Anyways, my suggestion is to raise them up at least to 30 inches off the ground, and then they'll be, you know, hovering at about 8 to 12 inches off of the ground, and you won't really have to go backtrack and wind them. So instead of 24 inches on the bottom wire, I would go 30 inches, and then even in between the wires, which are 18 inches, you could easily bring that down to 15 inches, and then you'd still be able to carry 5 wires total on the tree, right? And you'd still have enough space to work with. So that's kind of how I approach pruning. Like I said, I consider each wire like its own scaffold branch, and as you wind the branches around, as you're training it, like this one, for example, this branch, it's hard to see the top of this branch, but this branch goes 3/4 up above the wire above it, right? So this branch right here ends up going 3/4 up the way of the next wire. So it's way over its space, so that when I prune it, I'm probably going to take off the most vigorous branches, which this one has 2, so hard to see, has 2 vigorous branches, or maybe a little bit older. I'll take off those 2, and I'll leave this 3, 1, 2, 3, and they'll be in its perfect space for next year, right? All of that above growth is just the growth from last year, from the last time I had pruned, and they didn't flower, right? So all the branches that didn't flower, they're too long, need to be pruned out. And then some of them, all like this one right here, it should be on its wire over here. Instead it's hanging down low. So these will have to go through, wind them around the wire. A lot of times the last one needs to be tied down. The last wind needs to be tied down, or you go off to the side or off too much, and then the tip is usually taken off, right? And then you're good. Or this one might be able to wind one more time. The more work you do one-handed, the more broken branches you have. Just a tip on that. See, then it's holding it down pretty good. All right, this video is getting long, and all the good stuff is at the end, so sorry. Anyways, this is how the keats grow, clusters. You might want to thin it out, because when they're so thick like this, they just scratch each other on the inside, and then also it creates space that maybe like mealybugs can get in. So I'm not gonna take off too much, but might as well take off a few. It's so heavy. Like even that is too much. Like you probably want to go down to 1 or 2, maybe 3 if they different levels. But lots of work on the trellises, and that's how I approach it. Thanks again. Thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe if you made it to the end.